So anyway, Professor Krishna was born in Chennai, South India, and he grew up in Indore. He first met and heard J. Krishnamurti in 1957-58 and continued to listen to Krishnamurti during his visits to Education Center in Rajghat, Varanasi. And he was a professor of physics at Banaras Hindu University. And in 1985, J.D. Krishnamurti asked him to take charge of Rajghat Education Center as its rector and principal, and of Rajghat Bisan School. And Professor Krishna served in that role from 1985 all the way to 2003. And he worked in that capacity and then has since been in charge of Krishnamurti Study Center in Rajghat. Professor Krishna has spoken around the globe for decades on Krishnamurti's teachings. His book, Jewel on Silver Platter, is an intimate portrait of Krishnamurti and a profound description of Krishnamurti's discoveries and revelations. And Professor Krishna's talk on world crises can't come at a better time, as the whole world is facing a potential disaster due to COVID-19. So now I'm not going to take any more time, sir. And once again, thank you very much for coming and addressing us. Please,
thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Ekambareshwar, for giving me this opportunity to speak on this topic with our friends in the Bay Area and around. If we look at the recent history, human history, let's take the 20th century, one finds that we have been going from one crisis to another, human beings. There were the two world wars, 1914 to 18 and 1939 to 45, where millions of people were killed. There were dictatorships under which millions of people were destroyed very cruelly, both under Hitler and the Holocaust and under Stalin in communist Russia. We don't really have a count of how many got killed in China, but the Red Revolution in China was quite violent and disorderly. There have been smaller wars, like the one in Israel between Jews and Arabs, between India and Pakistan over Kashmir and Bangladesh, and several others in Europe. I don't want to recount them because that's not the purpose here. And then there have been all these global catastrophes, ecological catastrophes, and so on, about which we are reading every day in the newspapers. The latest one being this COVID. There have also been the Spanish flu, the Bengal famine, the slavery, the colonization of Africa, Australia, America, with lot and lot of cruelty. More recently, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, where millions of people got displaced from their homes. Right now in India, it's going on. This COVID has caused great strife, especially for the migrant workers, who are millions in number, who have lost their jobs. And they are people who live hand to mouth from day to day. And because of the lockdown, they are not even able to go home. So it has become a great tragedy where millions of people are simply trying to walk home, carrying their fathers and mothers on their shoulders and children. 3, 4-year-old children, women, and lots of deaths on the way, and so on. There was similar great tragedy after the independence of India because the British divided India into two countries with a line that tried to separate Muslims from Hindus, which led to a mass migration of populations. And that resulted also in lakhs of people dying in rioting. So the question is, what is wrong with the way the whole world is organized or the way we live? Why is there almost no place where there is peace and prosperity and happiness, no crime, and so on? So Krishnamurti made a very couple of very drastic statements about this. One is, he said, it seems to us that the crisis is out there and that the people there are responsible for it, whether it's the Kashmir crisis or in Israel or this COVID or all these crises. There is a external cause, the apparent external cause. And our response to this has been, for example, to prevent wars, we have created first the League of Nations and then the United Nations, whose job is that whenever any situation anywhere in the world becomes more serious and is likely to become a larger war, they start diplomatic efforts to reach some sort of peace agreement. And this has been going on. If we take the example of Arabs and Jews, several such agreements have been made. Temporarily peace comes, then the agreements get broken. And again, so we are almost back to square one. Nothing has moved since 1948 when Israel was created. And the same is true of the situation in Kashmir. So obviously must be deeper causation which needs to be looked into. And that is what Krishnamurti did. He said that the crisis is not out there. It is in the consciousness of man. That so long as we live with the consciousness with which we are staying, and by consciousness he meant the content of consciousness within us. And so long as we don't understand this causation at the level of consciousness and free ourselves of it, these tragedies will keep occurring again and again. And our history shows that. I mean, war is not a new phenomenon. It has been there for perhaps 5,000 years. In fact, it has become much worse because of all the um, power unleashed by science and technology. Because in the Mahabharata and so on, they used to go on a field and fight a war, and only a certain amount of damage was done. Women and children were not involved, public was not involved. Just the armies used to fight. It was like a match between the two armies on a football field. Uh, but now you can decimate a whole country with a single bomb. And that has become possible because of all the scientific research that has gone and the knowledge that we have acquired, with which we can now make atomic bombs and nuclear bombs. So wars have become far more dangerous, but psychologically, we were always at war. So one of the fundamental questions is, when do you call it a war? We call it a war when guns start shooting, tanks start moving, planes start bombing, and so on. But isn't there psychological warfare between the two countries or the two religions going on, or the two communities or the two castes? Obviously, the psychological conflict is what leads to the physical conflict. But the world has been always concerned with addressing the physical part and not addressing the psychological. And Krishnamurti pointed this out. He said that it's like you keep on getting headaches and you keep taking aspirin to solve that headache, and you never inquire why you are continuously getting headaches. What is the underlying disease or disorder in the body which is causing that? In the same way, there is underlying disorder in our consciousness from which all this emanates. And unless we deal with that, these tragedies will keep occurring. You will make structural changes, economic, political, legal, uh, etc., military, but they don't really cure the disease. The disease continues underneath. So he was more interested in addressing the root of the problem. And one of his statements concerning this was that you are the world. The crisis in the world is there because there is crisis in our consciousness. Another statement of his was that the individual problem is not separate from the world problem. For the same reason for which countries fight, for the same reason human beings fight with each other, castes fight with each other, husband and wife fight with each other, friends break up, and so on. So at the consciousness level, the source of the problem is the same. And so he said there has been no psychological evolution. Psychologically, humanity is at the same state in which the primitive man was. All the progress that we have made is a structural progress, scientific progress, progress in knowledge, and so on, but it has not been coupled with wisdom. And when knowledge is not coupled with wisdom, it creates a crisis. Because that knowledge is power, it is ability, and that ability can be used constructively or destructively. And human history shows that we have used it much more destructively than constructively. We are the only species that has destroyed our own kind as much as we have done, millions of human beings. We are the only species which has destroyed nature on a large scale, brought about pollution, ill health, and so on. We have also done very good things, developed a healthcare system and all that, but we are constantly living under this fear of insecurity and the shadow of war. Not all disasters and crises arise only from the psychological or from the consciousness of man. There are things like earthquakes and uh, epidemics and so on, which may not be directly connected with the consciousness of man, but they are also contributed to. That's what many sociologists and psychologists tell us, that the way we are approaching life and progress and so on is causing all these ecological catastrophes and pollution, the fact that the air has not remained safe to breathe, the water has not remained safe to drink, and so on. So there is this whole new field of sustainable development and so on, which is trying to sort that out and alternative energies and so on, like that. But we are not solving this problem at the consciousness level. And therefore, it keeps recurring in different forms. You may solve some problems. You may build better roads, better planes, better cars, better mobile phones, better internet, and so on. Nothing wrong with that. Better treatments of patients. But you will never have by these methods peace and elimination of war and division and so on. So he demanded that we need to think in terms of the transformation of consciousness. So to look at this whole issue afresh and with an unprejudiced mind, which means without already forming preconceived opinions and so on. One needs to look at it afresh and look at it objectively. Now that becomes difficult when we are identified with certain ideologies or certain nations or certain religious beliefs and so on. So he said, can you set that aside? And can you look at it afresh so that your past doesn't interfere with your observation? I consider that as what we do in science. We say also that you must look at the results of the experiment afresh and doubt and question and try to discover for yourself what the truth is, the underlying truth is. And don't bring in your own desires and your own wishes and your own beliefs into this quest for truth. We do that in science, but we don't do that in the field of the psyche. So in order to look that way, since we are not free people, it is very difficult for us to keep our knowledge and our predilections out completely from our approach or our observations. I propose to take up a thought experiment. Imagine that an alien who has never been on Earth and is coming from outer space and approaching the Earth. How would he see the state of our world and what would he think? Because he is not taking any sides and he doesn't know anything about the Earth. We can do that imaginary experiment, and with the help of that we come to more fundamental questions than what we normally ask. And those questions are important. So when he is looking from a distance, what he'll see is a spherical globe, almost perfect sphere, with a blue halo around it. Great beauty. And as he comes closer, he will see that 3/4 of the surface is covered with water, that there are all these seas which separate the continents from each other. And then as he comes still closer, he will see that human beings have built cities and amassed a lot of knowledge. I'm assuming that the observer, the alien, is an intelligent man. So he will see that we have built museums, we have built religions, we have built agriculture and so on, and cities. He will marvel at all this and really consider that these are fairly intelligent people to be able to do that and people with great ability and intelligence. But he'll also see that the people move in a certain region and they don't seem to cross certain boundaries. And he would wonder, what is that? Why is it that they are confined within a certain boundary and very few are able to cross that boundary? When animals are able to go through, the breeze goes through, mountain ranges and forests go through, birds and creatures go through, but human beings are not able to go through. You will wonder, what is the problem? Why? That raises the fundamental question, why we have created countries, why don't we regard ourselves as global citizens of the earth and create countries only for administrative purposes, like we do within a country for the states, and why we amass huge armies out of fear of the neighboring state or of a more distant state attacking us, and so on. He would, since he's not used to that, he would wonder what's wrong. We grow up with all this situation from childhood and it becomes a norm in our mind, and we think that this can't be changed, which may be true at a certain social level, but we need to inquire what has brought this about. Because half the revenue of almost all the countries goes into maintaining the war machine, maintaining an army, navy, air force, weapons of destruction. They all say this is necessary for defense, but usually it is also used for offense to threaten people. And the more powerful threaten, they don't protect. So power, our relationship with power is used to dominate for our own nation or our own religious group or whatever, and not to protect, not to enhance the happiness of all the peoples of the world. We don't think in terms of that. So there is this feeling about us and them. All division, all wars, all terrorism, all rioting, all caste fighting, discrimination, everything comes out of this. We don't question that. We identify ourselves. It's usually just a accident of birth. You happen to be born in a particular country, a particular family who has a particular religion, and we acquire all that. And we begin to call it my culture, my religion, my country, and then it is promoted. Nationalism is promoted, and that makes you feel separate from the other. And we want to work for the welfare of the me and the mine, but we are willing to destroy the other for the sake of that. So Krishnamurti questioned this whole thing. He said, the truth is that the other man is yourself. And you feel separate because you have identified yourself with a fragment and given tremendous importance to certain superficial things, like the dress of a man or the way he prays to God or the food he eats and so on. And therefore you feel separated from him. But if you really look at it deeper, we share the entire body in common. You ask any doctor and he'll tell you that By looking at the body, I can't tell what is the caste of a man or what is the religion of a man. Perhaps I can tell the nationality because the superficial differences on the skin and color and so on, you can identify with the location where this man was born. But that's very, very superficial. The blood circulates the same way, the nervous system functions the same way. Ask any biologist, any doctor, and he'll tell you no, everything is the same. Even the blood can be transfused. Is the consciousness very different? And you will find that no, all human beings have desire, all human beings have attachment, all human beings have fear and sorrow, all have the same feelings of jealousy and anger, not identical, but we are standing on the same ground. Everybody has memory, everybody has intelligence, everybody has imagination. So we are 90% same, or maybe 99% same, both in the body and in the consciousness. Then with that 1% difference, how come we feel so different? Because we have identified ourselves with very superficial things. So this is a psychological happening, a psychological phenomenon that takes place within us. And we need to ask this deeper question that we are capable of seeing differences as just differences. You see a tall man and a short man, it's just a difference. You see a man who speaks one language and the other man speaks another language. You understand that. You see it only as a difference. You don't create superiority and inferiority out of it. You don't create like and dislike or hatred. You don't group around. We haven't had a war between tall people and short people. Thank God. We are not that stupid, but we are fairly stupid. Because what does it matter to you? Which way a man prays to God and what is his concept of God? If it prayed the way you pray, what difference would it make? Ultimately, what matters is how he behaves, whether he is a kind human being, whether he is large hearted, whether he has love and compassion, and is he violent or non violent. All that is not affected by the way he prays to God or the color of his skin. This whole business of uh, racial discrimination and so on, just based on color of the skin. So that's why we are still extremely stupid. We are not rational beings at all. And because we take all this for granted and never question it, it continues. So Krishnamurti pointed out that when you grow up, the child sees what is going on in society around him and he imbibes all that from his environment and so on. So what is outside becomes what is inside, and what is inside maintains what is outside. To give a rather simplistic example, there is casteism in India because the Indian child grows up in a society in which he sees casteism in operation. The government may talk about caste is unimportant, you must not believe in it, and so on. But he sees that in practice. It's going on. It comes inside his mind. He treats the Brahmin differently, the Shudra differently, and so on. So he maintains casteism when he grows up. Now, unless he questions that, unless he eradicates this, unless he sees the falseness of it, the danger of it, it won't drop away. Therefore, it is important inquiry, to inculcate inquiry into what is true and what is false. That inquiry is what is called self knowledge. It's different from the other knowledge that we acquire, which is accumulative, which we acquire through our household and then school and college and university and so on. We know how a human being grows in knowledge and skills and techniques. Those things can be learned that way. But this is not encouraged, that you have to also engage into what is true and what is false. You're just believing whatever you have been told. And therefore, all kinds of cruelty perpetuates itself. We have had the dowry system, the sati system, we have had slavery, we have had kingships and military dictatorships. The Arabs tell their children that are our enemies, and the Jews tell their children that Arabs are our enemies. The old people die, and the prejudices of the old perpetrate into the young. So, how will that division ever end? Unless you are taught to inquire. So, Krishnamurti said, don't create conformist minds. Education is creating conformist minds which can fit into society. And he made a very drastic statement which we need to investigate. He said, it's not a measure of health to be well adjusted to a sick society. He said the society is sick, which means we are not living rightly. We don't know what right living is. If we did, why would we have all these crises? Why would we have so much crime? Why would we have this form of crime called war, which is a stupendous crime? So it's all that is pointing out that really the way we have defined intelligence is not really intelligence. Krishnamurti said there is no intelligence without compassion. He also said without love and goodness, you are not educated. In the third volume of the Commentaries on Living, there is an article which describes his conversation with four students who came to talk to him about their education. And there he points out to them that you are just learning how to do things, but you are not learning about yourself. And that's far more important because without self knowledge, you have no wisdom. You don't understand relationships. You don't understand sexuality. You don't understand your relationship with power. And you just imitate whatever is going on in society. And society is sick because all the time it's going from crisis to crisis. And that society is built of millions of human beings like you and me. So ultimately, whatever is there in our consciousness projects itself into our relationships. And millions of such relationships, or perhaps one should say billions of such relationships, constitute society. So society is not separate from us. But we think that if we had a better prime minister, if we had another form of government, if there was a better messiah who came and gave us advice, he can create peace and happiness and so on. I don't need to change. I can continue to be the way I am, but someone else must come around and bring peace and happiness and prosperity into society. Otherwise, I'm complaining. And he pointed out the fallacy of it, that this is an illusion. You will not have those changes. You cannot bring peace and happiness, so on in this way. We have tried religions. People have sincerely tried to follow their religions. But religions have also created all this divide. There have been more religious wars than even wars in the name of property and land. So he is pointing out to deeper truths. Now, truth is neither easy nor difficult. Truth is truth. If you don't realize that truth, you live, you do so at your own peril. Just as if you don't accept gravitation, you will just fall into a pit if you don't understand that the earth attracts you and so on. Now, so in the same way, if you don't accept these truths, you live in illusion. And a mind that is caught in illusion is a very superficial mind. It has no wisdom. There is wisdom only when you are in contact with reality, with truth, with facts, not with your own constructs of the mind and living in that thought world of your own creation. That's an illusion. The tree is not an illusion. The tree has been created by nature. But castes have not been created by nature. It's been created by man. And you have accepted it and called it our culture. The Islamic people say our women don't reveal their faces to anyone other than their husbands. That's our culture, our morality, and they feel proud of it. They are not aware that they are calling it culture, but they are also imprisoning their women. It doesn't, they don't see the cruelty in it. And they consider it immoral if a woman does not do that. In the same way, we are not aware of the illusions in our mind. Nationalism is an illusion. It's a fact that I was born in India. But unless you ask deeper questions, what is India? And why should I be proud of India and the Indian culture? What have I done? I remember a dialogue in which some Hindus went to Krishnaji and said, Sir, in our culture, more than 5,000 years ago, we already had Upanishadic dialogues and rishis and so on. All that, Europe and so on, they were primitive. And Krishna said, Yes, sir, that's true. You have had great wisdom among your ancestors. But what have you done with all that? What have you done with what they have said in Buddhism or Buddhist thought or uh, Jain thought or Upanishads and so on? You just translate, you give lectures, you propagate those ideas, or have you discovered the truth of that for yourself? And towards the last year of his life, he kept asking me, Sir, why is it that nobody is willing to give their life to find out what did the Buddha mean? What did he actually mean? Not discuss it and talk about it. What did he mean? Because he said he has pointed out all these things, and so have several others in this country. And he added that the West has never known it. Because in Christianity, inquiry was forbidden, and anyone who questioned was often put on the stake. So they never went very deep into this. They just had belief, and religion was equated with belief. In India also, there is belief, there is superstition, all that. But there was this long legacy of religious inquiry. We have not valued that. We have promoted scientific inquiry because we are wanting the material progress of the West, but we have not valued growth in wisdom. So there has been a lopsided development of the human mind. We have become intellectuals. We are very clever in our profession and very ignorant about our relationships, the way our consciousness works. So you find that very intelligent people, even Nobel laureates and so on, whom we worship because we worship achievement and that kind of intelligence which leads to this kind of progress, so-called progress. But if you look at their life, you will find that often that life does not reflect that intelligence. There is a miserable life, including poets and musicians and all this. We are dazzled by their achievement. But if you look at their whole life, you will find that they have very little understanding of themselves. So Krishnamurti pointed out that the purpose of religion is to come upon order in consciousness. Virtue is at the level of consciousness, and religions have tried to define virtue at the level of actions and ask people to practice virtue. You can't practice virtue. You can't practice non-violence. When there is violence within you, you will only control the violence within you. That's not non-violence. When you hate a human being, when you get angry with another human being, which is a mild form of hatred, you are violent. You call it violence only when somebody physically hits the other person. Much before that, in the consciousness, there is violence, and we don't object to it. We don't want to inquire into it. So he said, you can't practice non-violence. It creates a paradox. You are violent, but you project yourself as non-violent. You want to be non-violent, and this creates a split personality. The person that you are and the person you feel I should be. And this conflict between what you are and what you should be creates a feeling of shame and depression. What is won over through will on one day has to be won over every day. So if you suppress your feelings, then you have to keep on suppressing them. But because you never inquire, why do I get that feeling? And you never free yourself of it. And therefore, you are not really virtuous. So religions have really not created virtue. They have given us a false feeling of being virtuous by worshipping, by going to the temple, by following certain things, by giving alms to the poor and so on. You have not come upon kindness in consciousness. You are extremely cruel towards your own wife and children, he said, and your people below you, your servants and so on. But you think you are very kind because you've been going to the temple every day and singing bhajans and associating with some type of people whom you admire. And this is a deception going on, practicing. So get out of all this, because ultimately this is what becomes the content of your consciousness. And that kind of thing is what is causing all this division and problems in life and leads ultimately to the crisis. When Gandhi was shot on 30th of January 1948, Krishnamurti was giving talks in Bombay. And at the end of his talk, one man asked him, "Sir, who was responsible for the murder of Gandhi?" And he gave a long answer which you can read in the complete works and so on. But I'll summarize it for you. May not be the exact words. He said, each one of you who is divided from his fellow man on the basis of nationality, on the basis of language, on the basis of religion, is responsible for that murder. Of course, we think only Godse was responsible. So what is he saying? The importance of Krishnamurti is that he raised so many questions, and unless you inquire into those questions, you don't come upon the wisdom that he is pointing to. So when you inquire into it, that what does he mean when he says that it's not just Godse and those two, three conspirators who were later on hung because the law found them guilty, that all of us are responsible for that murder. Now I understand it the following way. These are not his words, these are my words. Because he kept saying, investigate what I am saying. Don't just accept what I say and repeat it. And you speak from your own understanding. So I am telling you from my understanding. After all, it is true that Godse pulled the trigger and killed Gandhi. But why? He was not born a murderer. How did he become that murderer? He grew up in this society. He got educated in this society, in his family, and then school and whatever he must have educated. The whole society educates a man. So he became fanatical with Hinduism versus Islam and hating these and so on, all that. And ultimately that led him to commit the murder because he thought Gandhi was favoring the Muslims and therefore doing wrong for his nation. And he was a great nationalist. That's what the BJP still says, that he was a great hero, at least one part of them. So who created all this society in which Godse became what he became? Obviously, all of us. We have all lived that way. We have created religious division and so on in society. And the child imbibes that as he grows up. Casteism, he imbibes that as he sees it going on. Therefore, all of us are responsible for that. And this is a deep truth to be understood. The war in Kashmir, the division in Kashmir, is not just the creation of the people of Kashmir. It's the creation of all of us. We have created this society in which Hinduism and Islam and this division between them. And then Jinnah came and wanted to separate country for them and so on. And then political ambitions and all that. You know that whole story. All that has created that issue. And now we are not able to solve it because all the time we are asking the wrong question. We are saying, is this territory mine or yours? That's not the most important question to ask. What is the possessiveness of that territory? How has that become so important? You're not asking, what do we need to do for the happiness of the people living here? If Pakistan was asking that question and India was asking that question, they would cooperate together and say, don't forget about whether it belongs to me or to you. Let's do for the welfare of the people whatever we can together. Finished. In a way, that's what the European Union tried to do. Otherwise, between Germany, France, and England, there were so many wars. It seemed impossible that they should ever be at peace with each other. But somewhere human beings realized that all these borders and so on, it may not have come out of wisdom. It may have come out of, social changes don't come only out of wisdom of people. Mm. If you have a wise leader, it helps. Like the presence of Mandela helped South Africa. The presence of Gandhi helped India. We got independence without too much of fighting and wars and so on. So on. So I'm not saying the individual doesn't matter, but major social changes happen out of economic compulsions and so on. So the European community may have started that way out of competition with Japan and so on, getting together as a common market and so on. But eventually they discovered that is much more sensible to have a single currency to make the borders unimportant, travel freely, and only administrative, let each country be an administrative unit of this union. Why can't we do that for the whole world? Even in concept. Are we even making an attempt to think along those lines? Is the United Nations trying to do that? Say that it's silly, this whole fighting and so on. Let's abolish all the armies. Let's get rid of all these destructive weapons. And let us agree that we will solve our disputes the same way, international disputes will be solved the same way as the disputes are solved within the country. Take the matter to court, have judges look into it and arbitration. And both sides accept what the court says. Why can't we do that internationally? Because we are not yet wise enough to realize the need for that. And that stupidity, it is really stupidity because everybody is losing in that. How much trouble it takes for a man like me to come to America. I have to go to Delhi and apply for a visa and make fingerprinting and all kinds of answer all kinds of questions before I'm permitted to come and give a lecture here. Which means what? They don't mind a bird flying in. They don't mind a dog coming in. They mind a human being coming in. That means everybody realizes that human beings are far more dangerous than animals. But we think we are far more intelligent, we are superior to animals and so on. So we must doubt whether all this idea of intelligence which we have, is that really intelligence? Because even biologically, Darwin said intelligence is that which leads to survival. Is this kind of intelligence taking us towards survival? Read the book by Martin Rees, one of the top cosmologists of the country, of the world, who was president of the Royal Society of London. He's a scientist, and he is giving all scientific facts on observations and saying humanity is not going to survive this century. Given the way we have developed power and the fact that there is so much hatred in the hearts of human beings, it's just a matter of time before this nuclear technology becomes accessible to terrorists. And then that's it. The terrorist is a man who's willing to die. His love of life is less than the love of revenge. He's willing to die. And so he will use that. He'll kill that people. And similarly, the ecological catastrophes and so on, they are all man-made out of greed, the division between poor and rich. All that comes from the way we are living. And we are living this way because we have accepted all that. So Krishnamurti raised questions about all that, about possessiveness, about our idea of success. He said, what you call success is mediocrity. Who is the successful man? The man who accepted the whole structure of society, competed with everybody else, and went ahead of all the people, which means he climbed every ladder that was put in front of him and he never questioned. That's why he is mediocre, because a man who never questions, just follows whatever he is being told, is mediocre. The Nazi Germany, they were blindly following Hitler. Mediocrity, not success. So we are measuring, giving tremendous importance to achievement, to talent, to success. That itself is a very deep rooted conditioning. We don't value goodness. We don't value love. We value achievement. And that has come from this whole thing in society of who makes a new discovery and so on. And even today, we are not solving these major problems of pollution and uh, global warming and so on. Most of our effort, research effort, is directed towards making still faster planes, still better mobile phones, still better computers and so on. Is that the priority? Is that the need right now? No. But that'll business, that'll bring money, that'll give you income. And that's our concept of success, to have a lot of money, have power to rise to the top of your institution. That has been, it's a propaganda in our mind. And Krishnamurti questioned that. He said, happy is the man who is nothing. You know, we have heard these things. The Buddha has said that. Socrates has said all these things. Socrates said long ago that I am not a Greek citizen. I'm a citizen of this world, of the world. But we are nationalistic. It's propaganda in our mind. Every country does that propaganda in school with a flag and all that. So it becomes part of our mind. All that is the illusion from which all this disorder is born. All the crises are born. So unless we take up this issue seriously, that we don't really know what right living is, and therefore we should have the humility to learn, not the learning of more techniques and more rational thought and so on, that has its own value in a different field, the field of knowledge, but this learning as to what is true and what is false, and what is the deep rooted cause behind all this. The Buddha pointed out the cause that still holds. He said ignorance is the cause of sorrow, sorrow as psychological suffering, not as pain, psychological suffering. It has a cause. The cause is illusion. Illusion as something that has just been a construct of thought. It's not part of nature. But you accept it as true, and therefore it becomes an illusion. And that's also the reason why it can be ended. And that was his third teaching, that the cause can be eliminated. And that's precisely what Krishnamurti did in the 20th century in a new language, a simple language in English, which anybody could understand, not in Pali or Sanskrit and not in verses and so on. Simple. These truths have been propounded earlier too, but he brought it out and he made it so that even the scientific world could not deny what he is saying. People like David Bohm, Josephson, Fritjof Capra, they're all influenced by him because they couldn't deny what he was talking. There is no belief in what he is talking. He's not trying to convince you of anything. It's a quest for truth, a parallel quest for truth, like the science is a quest for truth about how nature functions. This is the truth about how our consciousness functions and how we are ourselves the authors of our own crises and our own sorrows. So that once you learn that, you have to take the responsibility for your own life. But there is this belief that somebody will come, a better prime minister, a better form of government, better laws, and that will solve these problems, which is not lack of intelligence. It will not solve the problems. Nor will religion, a new religion and new Messiah. After all, Buddha has come and gone, Jesus Christ came and went, Krishnamurti has come and gone. The world goes on the same way. One man brings a new light into human consciousness, but the human consciousness interprets that, twists that, and accommodates that into their own thinking. That's what has happened to all the religious teachers. And that's why Krishnamurti refused to create a religion around his teaching. He told the foundations, please don't institutionalize this teaching. And the teaching is not in my words. They are merely pointers to the truth. And you should not worship the pointer, nor the guru. You must investigate the questions that I am raising. In investigating the question, you will come upon deeper insights into your own working. You don't have to understand my teaching. You have to understand yourself. So it's completely different from what most of the traditional religions were saying, that you practice this and you do this and you can become virtuous and so on. At a social level, yes, all those things matter. Don't steal, don't hit others, don't be violent and so on. But people are not able to do that. You can't do that by decision. You don't have to accept this. You can question it. Try it out in your life. Say from tomorrow, I will not worry, or I will be peaceful, and see whether your decision works. So you will soon find that decision works only in very superficial things, in what I want to eat, or what dress I will wear, or which car I will buy, and so on. But the greatest things in life can't be had through decision. They can only come to you through growing in wisdom. And the way to grow in wisdom is to do this inquiry of self-knowledge, which is not just an intellectual inquiry. Truth is not just a correct statement, unlike in science. Truth is a holistic perception of what is true and what is false. So that, my friends, with that, I would like to end my talk, and we can have some questions and answers. Perhaps Ekambaresher has planned to have a little time off before we enter the second phase, question and
Sir,
answer
that's,
phase.
I was going to suggest that we are, say, a little after 3 o'clock right now, and maybe we
Yeah,
take a 10-minute break and then come back and go into a question and answer session. Is that okay for everybody?
yes, that's fine. That's what I'm suggesting. That
Yeah, we still don't have Rav yet, but
okay.
if anyone has a question, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. Everyone is muted by default.
Do I need to mute myself too?
No, you are fine, sir.
Okay. Oh, Ekambaresher has come.
So I think we're all back here for the question answer session.
Yeah.
And I just mentioned that, please raise your hands so I can go ahead and take your turn to ask the question. And then while the professor is answering, if you don't mind, please mute yourself as well, so we can all listen to him clearly. Yes, sir. Baldev, go ahead, sir.
Sir, I have a question that you just mentioned.
I still remember our meeting in Sanan.
Yeah, right, sir. So I have a question that you mentioned that technologically we have advanced, but psychologically we have no evolution. So my question is that could you a little bit talk about this psychological evolution? Because the time is involved if you in normal evolution way, but is there, when we talk about psychological evolution, is it really evolution or there is something involved in it? So could you go into a little bit in the psychological evolution?
Sure. Connected with how an illusion ends in our mind. Because so long as all those illusions guide us, which are there in our mind, they create the disorder in consciousness, and all the crises follow from that, as Krishna explained, and we looked at that in my talk today. There's not just
Excuse me,
one
Professor
single.
Krishna.
Yes.
If I may interrupt, it looks like your voice is not coming through as well as it was coming before.
Maybe the microphone position. Do we better now?
There is a background noise as you speak through the mic.
Maybe if you unplug.
There is a fan working on top, but I need that it's very hot.
Professor Krishna, if you unplug and then plug back your headset, maybe that helps.
Okay.
It's electronic feedback.
Yes.
Is that better now?
Yes, that is good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one plug was loose. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so I was saying that there are a number of illusions, as I pointed out, and from those illusions, all the disorder arises, both in our consciousness and therefore in society, and that ultimately, when it takes a huge form, we call it a crisis. So this process of self-knowledge is an inquiry into what we are assuming to be true. We need to doubt whether that is true. So just like in science, we don't accept what we see to be true. The earth looks flat, and for a long time they thought it was flat. But when they questioned that and looked into it and so on, they found that it's just a sphere of very large radius. It appears to be flat, but it's not flat. Similarly, it appears that the sun rises and sets and moves around the earth, and they assumed that the earth was at the center. That was an illusion. But the truth was found by investigating, and then Copernicus and later on Galileo and so on showed that it's really the earth that is rotating around its axis, and that is why everything seems to be rising and setting. So in the same way, there are a lot of illusions in our mind, and the difficulty is that the mind that has an illusion is not aware of the illusion. If it was aware of the illusion would cease to be very crucial. For example, fairy tales. We know that fairy tales are not true. We just tell them in order to entertain the children and so on. But if you really took them to be true, and you thought of the ghost and the witch and so on in real life and so on, then it would become superstition and so on and create an illusion. But the terrorist really believes that what he is doing is true, that he needs to take revenge and so on, and that he will go to heaven if he does that. He really believes that. To him, that is the truth. To us, it may appear like an illusion. Hitler really thought that the Jews were vermin and the world would be a better place if they are eliminated and so on. And he acted on that belief. It was false. He didn't know that it was false. So that was an illusion from which huge amount of disorder and cruelty came. In the same way, we have illusions in our mind, and we are not aware that they are illusions and they are producing disorder in our consciousness. We think the disorder comes from outside. So the first thing is to become aware, to have the humility to know that you don't know the truth, and to posit the reality or the truth as the unknown, and then value doubt and value dissent. And you're trying to discover the truth which is in the unknown. Now, the unknown cannot be approached through the known. It requires a creative perception, and a creative perception is blocked when you have very strong ideological beliefs or religious beliefs which you are not willing to question. So then everything gets colored by that, your thinking gets colored by that. You see it only from your point of view, and therefore you don't come upon the universal truth, and the illusion is maintained. So to come upon a learning mind, Krishnamurti said, it's the learning mind that is the religious mind. Not the mind having belief and doing worship and all that. That's all cultural. You don't have to be against that, but that's not real religion, because that doesn't bring virtue into consciousness. Virtue is order in consciousness. Long ago, Socrates said that too. He said there is only one virtue, and that is order in consciousness. The Buddha pointed it out in his own words and languages and so on, and so did Krishnamurti. And he said disorder has got a cause, and therefore disorder can be eliminated. But order has no cause. Therefore you cannot create order. You can only eliminate disorder. And disorder can be eliminated because it originates from an illusion, and you have to inquire and find out what is the illusion from which the disorder is coming. So this inquiry begins with the observing your own consciousness. Very honestly, when you see a disorder, either you're feeling jealous or you're getting angry or you're feeling hateful or you have a conflict within yourself, a sense of shame and all that, that's an opportunity to learn about yourself. That observation is telling me, Krishna, there is still some illusion in your mind somewhere from which this is arising in your consciousness. Find out what that is and eliminate it. I may be able to do it, I may not be able to do it. If I don't even attempt it, it is sure that I will not be able to do it. I'll just continue with the illusion. But because I am now attempting it, I cannot insist that it must go away. There is no guarantee that it will go away. I consider it akin to, say, learning physics. You learn physics in order to understand how things work in nature. You don't learn physics in order to become Einstein. You may not become Einstein. You may have as much understanding as you have. That much understanding of how things work in nature is there in you. And the same I consider to be true. These are not the words of Krishnamurti. This is what my experience is. That as you progress in this inquiry, the simpler illusions drop away more easily. Superstitions, for example, drop away even with scientific inquiry and intellectual inquiry. But then there are cultural illusions which are more deep-seated in our consciousness. All these religious divisions, our idea of success, all these are cultural illusions. They are picked up from your culture. To see through that is more difficult. Beyond that, still deeper in our consciousness are the psychological illusions, what psychologists call complexes. Some fear that is remembered from the past childhood and that still crops up in my consciousness and so on. You may or may not be able to solve that, get rid of it. And finally, the deepest illusion is the illusion of being a separate self. The sages have pointed out that we are not separate selves. We think so, and that is why we feel separate from each other, because we identify with our memories and our knowledge and so on. If we don't do that, then we would realize that we are all one and that these differences are superficial. You may or may not be able to see the truth of that. But if you don't begin this inquiry, you don't start with self-knowledge, you don't grow in wisdom. And our education has not given importance to this. I mean, throughout in my MSc or PhD, I did all kinds of things in mathematics and physics and all that. Nobody ever raised this question. Is love the same thing as attachment? Is possessiveness love? What is really love? Nobody. Everybody said love is the greatest thing in life and it's so wonderful to have love and things like that. But nobody really inquired deeply what is love. You go and ask the professor in the university and you will find that he is as ignorant about it as the child or your gardener. So this understanding doesn't develop unless you take it up. And this truth is not just an intellectual truth which can be handed down to you by experts or from a book, because it's not at the level of idea. It's at the level of perception. Nobody can give you perception, but you can come upon that perception. So what Krishnamurti said was, don't accept what I say. Question it, investigate it, find out whether it is true by watching your own consciousness in the mirror of relationship. There it is revealing to you. And from that observation, you can, if you discover the truth for yourself, then it is your truth. It's not a truth that Krishnamurti had seen and I have agreed or accepted. That's the difficulty of this quest. But I mean, it's not easy to learn differential equations. You learn 20 years, you work very hard, 6 hours every day, something, then you begin to understand how the rocket goes to the moon or how differential equations are solved. And we haven't given time and attention to this inquiry at all. So we don't grow in wisdom. And so we continue with this lopsided development of the human mind. Very intelligent in one field and very stupid in the rest of life. So I don't know whether I have answered your question, Baldev, but that's my response.
Sam, do you want to go next?
Professor Krishna, it's an honor to have you back here to our group. It was
No,
really is.
Blessed.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I loved your book. I just want to give you, because you put me so much closer to Krishnamurti. I've read a lot of his book, but I didn't know anything about his personality, his real life situation. And your book really gave me so much closeness to how he was as a real human being.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I wanted to ask more about this inquiry, the nature of this inquiry that
You got muted.
sorry,
Yeah,
thank you.
now it's coming. Yeah.
You mentioned that we need to be observing our own consciousness, and I also heard you saying we need to get out of our content of consciousness. So how do we do this inquiry afresh and not colored bias by the content of consciousness? How do I trust the observation that I have that is the true observation or is colored by observation? Can you uh, take us a little bit deeper into the nature of this observation, please?
Sure, sir. I think that the main transition which is required to begin this kind of learning, which we call self-knowledge, is to change from an achieving mind to a learning mind. Not trying to become something, not trying to achieve a result, including even change myself. If you make that into an aim and you go after it, then it becomes an ego process. And through an ego process, you cannot come to freedom from the ego. So that's a wrong approach. And Krishnamurti often said that the approach to a question is more important than the question or the answer. Because the approach determines what you will receive from it. So we must not approach this issue itself egoistically. That's very important. This inquiry should not be done as an achievement. Otherwise, it becomes a desire process and all the consequences of desire and achievement follow. And it's a religious mind only when it is approaching it with a learning mind. The learning mind is saying, why is it there? What is causing this within me? And I'm not just trying to analyze and answer that question analytically, because I have learned that just the analysis is not wrong, but it just becomes a knowledge property in my mind. And property doesn't transform consciousness. So the professor of Buddhist philosophy is not the Buddha, although he can tell you everything about what the Buddha said, and perhaps he can explain Buddha's teachings better than the Buddha himself did, because he may be very erudite and very capable with words which Buddha might not have been. But the Buddha had the insight, and he freed himself from those illusions, and he came upon the truth, and that truth transforms the consciousness. Now, your question is right, that how do I know whether I have come upon the truth? You have no, you don't know, and you mustn't assume that you have. You must assume that you don't know. And then start with this inquiry through observation of your consciousness. Every time you see disorder in consciousness, which is very perceptible because that disorder is painful, psychologically painful or physically painful, but it's painful. And pain is very perceptible. Now, normally the tendency is to try to avoid that pain quickly or suppress it or get away from it, solve the problem. That's a wrong approach. Krishnamurti says, when you feel jealous, it's an opportunity to learn about yourself. Therefore, jealousy is a jewel. Don't discard it. Don't suppress it. Don't escape from it. Don't judge it and say it should not be there and all that. Watch it. Find out where does it arise from. And you will discover from yourself, you will go to deeper questions like, I'm comparing myself with him and he has more than me, therefore I feel jealous. And so why do I compare myself with another? And so on. So you go from one question to another question, a deeper question. And the only proof is that if you stop feeling that way, then you know that you must have seen something that is true. But often that change takes place even without your own knowledge that it has taken place. It is because the change is a byproduct of this perception. And so when your job is perception and when you're not doing it with the idea of change, the change will take care of itself and will happen or not happen. Why should it happen if I don't deserve it? If I deserve it, it will happen. So the important thing is for me to deserve it, which means for me to eradicate the illusion in my mind. So that's the nature of this inquiry. But it is subtle because the way we are trained, which is a very habitual process throughout our education, is to all the time approach with the idea of achievement. And also in the physical realm, it works because in the physical realm, you have a model, you have an ideal, and you achieve that. You get a map of your house which you want to build, you get the money, you get the tools, you get the workers, and you put in your effort and you achieve and you build the house. So the mind thinks that that same process can be applied in the psychological field. That if I am getting angry, I can have an ideal in front of me and I can get the tools and I can work on myself and I can get rid of this anger. You can't. That process is an illusion here. But it's not an illusion in the physical realm. And this knowing where that is legitimate and where it is not is self-knowledge. Then you don't use thought where thought is not necessary, and you don't discard thought where thought is useful and necessary. So to know that, to understand the right place of thought in your life, that is self-knowledge. Otherwise, you waste your energy doing a lot of things which are impossible and you don't get anywhere and it leads to frustration and that becomes a second problem. So who was it who said repentance is man's second mistake? Yeah.
Very good,
It's
sir.
not an achievement. Yeah. The real change in us doesn't come from effort of will. It comes from as a byproduct of understanding ourselves.
Um, yeah. Vidyasagar, did you want to ask a question, sir?
Yes. So, Professor, it's very nice to see you again and
Thank
hear
you.
your
Namaskar.
namaskar.
Yeah.
And very nice to hear you speak about Krishnamurti, very illuminating to us. So I would like to know your observations about something. Now,
Tell me.
if we say that, this life of ours is, let us say, can be thought of in terms of four things: human body, our body, then our heart as a set of emotions, our mind as the agency of thought, thinking, and the actions. Right. So
Mm.
let us put aside the human body.
Mm.
Now, if we take the other three,
Mm.
I'm curious about your observations about the interactions of these fields. Now, I would like to say one thing before I um, ask you for your observations. That is, as far as human actions are concerned, see, when we look at other people, it is through their actions that we know what is happening or infer from their actions what is happening or what they are thinking and feeling, right?
Mm.
So that's one thing. And so with that preface, I would like you to share with us your observations about the interactions of the human mind, human heart, and the human actions.
Yes, sir. What I would say is that what we see in another is the action that he is performing that's visible to us. We don't know the motive with which he is performing that action. We often guess that motive. We guess that motive on the basis that if we were doing that action, what is the motive with which we would be doing that action? And we may attribute that motive to him. You can't be sure of the correctness of that. Therefore, it is important not to attribute motives to the actions of others. And it is not important for us to judge others and then decide whether to be friendly with them or not, which is a process that the ego makes us do, because we form images of a person, and then from that images we start deciding whether I should become friendly with him or not. Now that means the other man, what he is determining what you are. And you are becoming suspicious and protective and so on, all of which is our ego acting that way. There is a different way of approaching this. It doesn't matter what that other person is. If you really want to help him, you have to help him to learn, which means you have to help him to see if you find an illusion in him, you can communicate to him and help him break that illusion. Only that is real help. Your judgment only creates a second problem for him, that he is doing something because of which now he is suffering from something or from some illusion, and you judge him and condemn him, then he has two problems. One problem, that illusion in his mind, and the other problem becomes your condemnation of him. So we are really, the way I tried to explain this or raise this question is that we are extremely sympathetic to a man who is physically blind. We help him across the road, we help him we bring a chair for him, we bring food to him, and so on. We feel great sympathy for a man who is physically blind. Why do we hate a human being who is mentally blind? That's a question you have to ask yourself. The terrorist is mentally blind. If you see that blindness, you feel sympathy for a man. He's sick. You don't dislike a sick man for being sick. But the action that he is performing creates hatred in us, and that hatred is our blindness, our illusion. He really deserves sympathy, and if you really want to help him, it doesn't help him if you hate him. This whole thing is a deep conditioning in us, which is inculcated right from childhood, that by threatening people, by being violent, we use it with our children, we use it in our relationships, close relationships. It is arm twisting, it is violence. And that's why the individual problem is not separate from the global problem. Because that same arm twisting America does for other nations which are weaker, forces them to do things which they don't want to do, saying that this is necessary for you and so on. But there is a threat behind it, that if you don't do this, that threat is part of violence, which means we believe in violence. Disciplining another person through fear is violence. That's why in education, Krishnamurti tried to change education, and he said there should be no use of fear in education. The school must be free from fear. It's your job to understand. If a child is indisciplined, throwing a tantrum and so on, it is our job to educate him and help him to get over that. He has a problem, and not threaten him into behaving himself. But all throughout society, in various ways, we threaten. And you see the same thing between countries. The powerful countries threaten the weak countries into compliance. Mm. So uh, it, one needs to go deep into this and free oneself from that kind of thinking of why do I judge other people, and then decide why can I not be large hearted and kind irrespective of what he is. See, if you must have read about Christ, no? That when he was being killed, he said, God, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He was feeling compassion for their ignorance. Why do we not feel compassion for the ignorance of the terrorists? That's the question we must live with and watch in ourselves when we find a person whom we think is evil. If you really want to help him, you have to interact with him. You have to help him to see, and so on. You have, of course, a right to decide to be out of his way. But if he's your friend, you should help him. If he is addicted to alcohol, you need to help him to come out of that addiction, not by threat. You won't help him to come out, or you make things more difficult for him. So that's what I would say, that if we get rid of violence in us, then we are free from judging other people. But it's a deep-rooted habit from childhood. It won't go so easily. You have to really work on that for yourself. So this whole approach to other people, that you make an image of that person, then through that image you view that person and you hate that person. Often you hate the whole community, saying, oh, he's a Muslim, Muslims are all like this, they are terrorists and so on. He may not be as an individual. So all that goes on in human consciousness, and one needs to free oneself of all this illusion. So Krishnamurti said, find out why you live with all these images. Why don't you live in the present and watch what that person is? Why do you even use the memory of your last interaction with him? He may have changed. He may have been upset that day and he behaved rudely, and you form an image and think he's a rude person. It may not be so. So it is important to approach people afresh and not from the memory of a previous occasion. That's how I understand Krishnaji's teaching. Whether we are able to do it or not is our problem.
So thank you very much, sir, for your insights.
Welcome, welcome, sir. Welcome.
I have a question.
Sure.
So in your talk, you talked about self-knowledge is being different from technical or technological knowledge. And I think I understand that part. But can you elaborate a little more on the differences between self-knowledge and wisdom?
Yeah. First statement from Krishnamurti. He said self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. That means that's the way you grow in wisdom. Wisdom is a more holistic understanding of the connections between all these things. There are various connections. I like to give a metaphor to explain this. You see, you must have seen if you take a big tree like a banyan tree, it has a huge root down below, and then it has large number of branches going in different directions and so on. In our consciousness, the ego is that root of the tree, and what manifests in our consciousness is one branch at a time. One branch may be fear, another may be sorrow, third may be violence, and fourth may be jealousy, and so on. Now, We are more concerned about the pain or the suffering that that manifestation brings in our consciousness, and therefore we try to solve it and we treat it as a problem. And when we have eliminated that branch, whichever way, by escaping or by, so that we have got rid of the pain, we feel satisfied. Krishnaji is saying that that branch which is manifesting in your consciousness is also an opportunity to go all the way to the root. Don't stop where you have ended the pain of that. Don't stop there. Find out why it happened. That is the same thing as the to come to the deeper causation. You have to ask deeper and deeper questions. Otherwise, you will not come to the deeper causation. We do that in science too, you know. You keep on saying what's the atom and then what's the nucleus and then what are these quarks and from where did they come, and so they went on and on and on. Ultimately, they came to the origin of the universe, and there are still unanswered questions there. So I found a parallel between that inquiry which we did in physics and this inquiry, which is in consciousness. But you need to be not satisfied with the answer. You need to go deeper and deeper into it. Uh, Ultimately, when you discover the root and you can uproot the whole tree, then that is mukti, that is freedom. But when you're just ended jealousy or anger or casteism or one such illusion in your mind and you are satisfied with it, then you have stopped halfway. And Krishnaji often said, uh, going halfway up the hill is mediocrity. So that's it, you know. You have to get out of this mindset of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. It's not easy because it's a deep-rooted instinct. In the animal also it is there. And in their case, it is physical pain and physical pleasure. In our case, the physical is there, but it is also psychological pleasure and psychological pain. So we like praise and we dislike criticism. And so we create friends and enemies, those who support supporters and um, opponents, like that. You have to get rid of that approach. You have to get rid of this approach of seeking support and seeking praise. Mm. Look through the praise. When a man is praising you, see what is true in that and what is false in that, and ignore the false and retain the true. And similarly, when a man is criticizing you, see what is true in it and act on it, find out for yourself, use it as a learning opportunity about yourself. A friend of yours or colleague has pointed out something, it may be partly true or may not be. You need to not discard it immediately saying, oh, he's nonsense, he's ill-treating me, and so on, so on, which we often do. And we start disliking that person. So if I may take a few minutes to really narrate a incident with Krishnamurti. I met him in Brockwood in 1981. I was at the H.H. Wills Physics Laboratory in Bristol, and I came to know that he has come to Brockwood. So I went to his talk and then went and met him because I knew him personally. So he told me, sir, the other day a man came here. He looked at the tent where I give these lectures. He looked at the school grounds. He came to our dining hall and ate food there. And then he came to see me. And he said, you have a nice thing set up here, haven't you? So I felt that why should somebody talk like that to Krishnaji? So I said, oh, sir, there are always people like that. Who cares? And he held my hand and he said, no, don't brush him aside. I watched myself for a whole week before saying to myself, it's not true. Don't quickly say it's not true because he is criticizing you. It may be true. And you may be going on with your own song or your own illusion. And your friend is pointing that out and you just discard it because it doesn't fit with your self-image. So don't have a self-image. That man was a human being. He came and he saw all this. And that's the feeling he got, that Krishnaji had established a nice thing. It could be true. Because all you have to do is give these talks and people come and touch your feet and feed you and buy airplanes for tickets for you and so on. If that's the reason you are giving the talks, then it's an ego activity. And he's right? That you have a nice thing going for yourself. So, but don't accept very quickly that there is no ego in this. He's giving you an opportunity to watch yourself. So that's the learning mind. And I found that Krishnaji was learning even on his deathbed. Even on his deathbed, if you see Pupulji's biography of him, he says that, "Oh sorrow, I thought I had seen the last of you." He noticed that some sorrow came in his mind at the last minute, but he detected it immediately and he said, "Oh sorrow, I thought I had seen the last of you." Right? Now, that has been said in our religious literature too, that the devil is all the time walking by the side of the Buddha. That means if his awareness lacks even for a moment, the devil can capture him. The devil works through the ego. The ego is the devil in us. Once I talked to Krishnamurti and said in Brockwood, I said, "Sir, you don't distinguish between a man who is still with the self and another who is still with the self. Uh, does it mean that anyone with the self is necessarily evil?" He said, "No, not he is evil. There is evil in him." Now, there is a subtle difference. He is evil is a judgment you have passed on the man. To say he is evil to the extent he is capable of being egoistic, right? That applies to all of us. We are all can be evil if we can be egoistic. If you have not rooted out the ego, that means rooted out this tendency of looking all the time for some praise, some profit, some motive, something to be received in that relationship, then the evil works. And the evil brings sorrow in the relationship, in your consciousness, everything. So that is ultimately the religious aim is of moksha or nirvana is to free oneself of this ego process. But as I said, it's a deep-rooted instinct, so it is not easy to. But he's not pointing out something to do which is easy. He's pointing out that which is true. So you have to examine whether it's true or it's false. In examining that, he says change happens. Not in trying to be not egoistic. That doesn't bring about. Even your ambition to have nirvana becomes ambition, and ambition is an ego process. Yeah. So you can't approach it that way. That's why I said this transition from an achieving mind, a desiring mind, to a mind that is learning. Learning about the mystery of life. I mean, it's a mystery, what our consciousness is, how it functions. I think it was Khalil Gibran who wrote that life is not a problem to be solved. It's a mystery to be lived. So it's like that. If you approach life as a mystery and you are all the time learning about it, that's the religious mind. Not the mind that is attained nirvana is religious. No. The mind that is approaching life with a religious mind, even if he experiences jealousy, he is learning about jealousy and he will change. To the extent he learns, he will change. So the change is a byproduct of learning. To try to bring about go directly for the change is an ego process. And through an ego process, you don't come to freedom from the ego. The ego is not something that exists within us like the stomach or our organs and so on. It is just, it comes into being in the manner in which you approach something. If you are looking for some gain, some profit, the ego is there. If you are not, if you are just, the desire to learn is not egoistic. The desire to become is egoistic. So it is subtle. So you can approach things non-egoistically. Then you will find that all these negative things which come from the egoistic approach are not there. So the same work can be done egoistically or it can be done non-egoistically. That's at the motive level.
The motive level, yeah.
Motive level, yeah. So it is not that some actions are religious and other actions are irreligious. No. Any action that is done egoistically, even if it seems beneficial outwardly, is wrong action, religious from the religious point of view. And any action that is done out of love, out of compassion, not a state of ego, not out of self-interest, is right action even if it fails. It can fail because it may still be an error of judgment. So that's a mistake. Mistakes are not wrongs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the religious definition of right and wrong is at the level of consciousness, at the level of motive,
Motive.
not at the level of the effect. That is a politician's or a businessman's definition of right and wrong. That which brings profit is right and that which brings loss is wrong. That's how I understand it.
Jonathan, you want to ask a question?
Yes. My wife is listening off camera, and I am asking a question on her behalf. And what she's asking is that if consciousness doesn't change through religion and philosophy, what is the proper role of religion and philosophy? Do they have any value beyond basic ethics and in creating basic cultural forms and structures?
They don't bring about virtue in consciousness. Virtue is at the level of consciousness. Uh, they can bring about social good. You see, I build a hospital. Now, even if I build that ambitiously and want my name and fame out of it and so on, that hospital does a social good because it treats human beings and relieves them of their illness or pain. So society regards that as virtuous, as a good thing. But from a religious point of view, it's good only if he has done out of love because he wanted to help do that, not if he did it for his own fame and name. Now, philosophy literally means the love of truth. And unfortunately, it has been translated more so in the West as the love of ideas. Philosophy has become the love of ideas. Ideas are not truths because truth is at the level of perception. Idea is just a mental property in the head. It will change your opinion in the head, but it won't transform your consciousness. And the true purpose of religion is to bring about this transformation of consciousness. That's why Krishnamurti said, you can't follow a wise man. Don't follow anybody. It has no meaning to say I am the follower of Gandhi. Because what do you mean by follower of Gandhi? You can imitate him in those places, things which you can decide about. You can wear khadi and you can sleep on the floor and you can live a simple life because you can decide to do that. But those are not the important things about Gandhi. The important thing is that he didn't feel any hatred for his enemies. and even a man who threw a bomb at him and so on, he forgave him. How will you get rid of hatred from your heart? You can't get rid of that by decision. So you will follow only the superficial things which are amenable to decision and will. So it was, I think, a philosopher, thinker, or sage in Japan called Basho in the 13th century who said, don't follow the wise man. Seek the wisdom that he has talked about. Not the man. Don't imitate the man. So all religions have made that mistake. They are trying to follow what the teacher has said. You can't follow what the teacher has said at a deep level without coming upon his wisdom. So how did Jesus Christ come upon this wisdom? He grew up as a Jew, and his conditioning was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That was the Jewish motto. How did he discover that no, you must not retaliate violence with violence, you must show the other cheek also, which is ultimately non-violence. Don't become violent just because the man in front is violent. So he freed himself of his conditioning. Now, he didn't have Christianity to direct him. He discovered that for himself. So you have to discover the truth of that for yourself. Then it acts on your consciousness. There is a similar dialogue where Krishnamurti is explaining to students in Brockwood that the words of the Buddha and of Jesus Christ are illusions for you because you have not perceived the truth of that for yourself. So one of the students asks him, sir, aren't your words also illusions for us? And he says immediately, yes, if you accept them. If you just accept my word on authority of Krishnamurti that is a wise man, therefore this must be true, it has no meaning. It's just an idea. It's a description of the truth which Krishnamurti saw, but you have not seen the truth of that. So that is the difference between philosophy and the religious quest. What is taken as philosophy now? The original meaning of philosophy was self-knowledge, which was transformation of consciousness. But gradually it became just, we do science and then we get a PhD, you have a doctor of philosophy, because it's all those ideas are correct ideas. So philosophy has a value at the level of knowledge. You get correct ideas. But they don't transform consciousness. The professor of philosophy is an ordinary man. He's not free from ambition and desire and all that. He's not a religious man. He's a thinker. So you have to distinguish between the two. Does that answer the question, Jonathan? You have to answer on behalf of your wife.
She's giving a big thumbs up, yeah.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
So I know Phil was he was talking about asking a question today, but he has not raised his hand.
Maybe it got solved. He found the answer by himself.
Or maybe he can't raise his hand because I have problem with raising hand myself. I don't know, somehow my keyboard is stuck. I cannot type anything, I cannot.
Pull your tongue out, put your tongue out.
But I do have a question though.
Yeah, sure, please.
Can
Yeah,
I?
go ahead.
Yes, sir. So once we inquire and have this religious mind, what is the purpose and responsibility that comes with this religious mind? And is there anything called a spirituality without activism? What is our purpose? What is our responsibility for those who do not have this gift of insight? Or are there any responsibility? Do we have any responsibilities? Can you please elaborate on that?
Yes. So the activists are interested in bringing about a social change. And we value social change. It's good if you can improve the economics and so on and so on. It will not solve the deeper problems or the level of your consciousness, at the level of division, at the level of uh, feeling hatred and war and all these deeper problems that we have. And similarly, unless you change your attitude towards nature and really realize that we are part of nature and nature is our friend and should not be looked upon as a resource for economic development and for the fulfillment of our desires, which is the attitude with which the world has approached nature. And that has given rise to all these ecological catastrophes. And you couple that with the national division and the competition between nations to uh, have the larger cake for themselves, and therefore the competition to destroy nature more and more and get the more oil or more whatever benefits out of it, then that has led to war, that has led to the division between those who have and those who have not, poverty and all that. Ultimately, it doesn't lead to happiness of humanity, in humanity. And to think that you will create happiness for the me and the mine by ignoring the happiness of the rest of the whole is also ignorance and an illusion, because we are all connected with each other. The ecologists are also saying that not only we are connected with each other, we are also connected with the trees and the atmosphere and the worm and the butterfly. That they are saying that they have now realized that you either have the whole of the earth and its environment, or you have none of it. You can't pick and choose and say that I will have this and I will not have that, because it's all interconnected and it's a very delicate balance. And when you try to get the big cake for yourself, you, you disturb that balance, which is exactly what global warming is. Global warming and deforestation and erosion, soil erosion and pollution of the air and water and so all that is a consequence of that kind of thinking. So there are deep repercussions, but the difficulty is that when you don't have a long vision, it appears profitable. The ego appears to be profitable. The ego appears to be a friend. So you need to watch for a long time and doubt that whether this egoistic approach is really a friend. And you will discover that really it is creating the greatest problems in your life and in society. But you don't go that far. You see immediate results. And so it appears that corruption is beneficial to me, because if I take money under the table, my wife and children will have a bigger car and a better house. And so I am willing to do that. But if corruption is right for you, it's right for everybody else. So when you go to the hospital, the doctor will want a bribe. When you take your child for admission to the school, the headmaster there will ask for a bribe. So you are not going to be able to just promote bribery in your own life without creating an atmosphere around you. That's why real change doesn't come through this activism. We have had this communist activism, we have had the French Revolution, so many revolutions. At the end of it, we are still in a mess. So they produce small effects for a temporary period, but they don't really bring about a lasting change. Communism had its own share of violence. Their ideas are not wrong, But because they could not change the human being, therefore the violence took a different form. And the state violence, it became state violence and imposition on people and so on. So it didn't bring any kind of real this thing. That experiment went on for 70 years in Russia, and we can learn from it that you can't change society through compulsion, through dictatorships and so on. All dictatorships, they thought that they would change society and they would make a better world and or better country, but they failed. Whether it was Hitler or Mussolini or so many fascist regimes all over the world. I mean, history is showing us all that. But we don't seem to learn from history because there is this strong uh, tendency to just imitate what we already have been doing or what our parents were doing, what everybody else around us is doing. So if everybody is chasing money and competitive and rising, it seems right. In fact, that's one of the definitions that is given of right, that what 90% of people around you is doing is right. But it's not, because what is right is what is good for the health and happiness of the whole, not just for the me and the mine. So that's the error in the egoistic approach.
Thank
So
you. Thank you.
Krishnamurti said, if we are egoistic, if you are angry, you are corrupt. But we have defined corruption as only financial corruption, taking money under the table. To him, it was all corruption. Even if you were hitting or angry or jealous, it's corruption. Ego is corruption. That means self-interest is corruption. Motivation of self-interest, acting out of that motivation of self-interest. Many of these activists are also acting out of self-interest. You find that you have replaced the government with this activist who revolted and so on. And then that man starts his own tyranny because he doesn't have the wisdom either or understanding. The revolutionaries don't necessarily come from wisdom. They come from anger. And so it doesn't solve the problem. These coups, all military coups you can see, nothing has changed because of them. Which doesn't mean you mustn't do any social good and so on. No, one is not saying that. But don't do it with that kind of motive, egoistic motive. You give because you want to give. You want to help somebody, go and help somebody. Not in order to get name and fame and so on.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Vidya Sagar, you want to go, sir?
Pardon?
Vidya.
Okay. Sir, so it's very nice to hear your, what goes on in your heart when we talk about these issues. So if we say that Krishnamurti is not a teacher in the sense that he gives you instructions about what to do. In that sense, suppose we say he's not a teacher, but he's a guide who points out directions that you can explore in your own self-inquiry.
Yeah.
Now, if he's a guide, I want to seek your guidance in following this guide. So I'll tell you some of the practical impediments in following the guidance.
Sure.
So one of the things is all of us try to understand. There's something like an innate urge to understand, and understanding leads to simplification. Now, what happens is, since we heard Krishnamurti and read about his teachings, what happens is when we, in our self-inquiry, there's a tendency to reach out to some of the words and concepts that Krishnamurti elaborated on. This could be conditioning, it could be you are the world, or something else like that.
Yeah.
So, as a matter of practice, how do you take care of that?
Sir, you have to be very careful. All the dangers which are there in any religion are also there in Krishnamurti's teaching. Because the danger is within us.
Mhm.
It depends on how we approach Krishnamurti's teaching. If we begin to make him into a hero, and which is what all the religions have done, then you are making the same mistake, and you're treating him as a perfect person, and you are admiring him, and you enjoy his teaching, and you become his follower. All that he has denied, he has forbidden, he has said no, the teacher is not important. Now, the teaching is important. Now, what is the teaching? He said the teaching is not in my book. The teaching, the words that I am speaking is not the teaching. The teaching, whatever I am speaking, I am saying this in order to make you realize the need to understand yourself. You don't have to understand my teaching. That becomes an intellectual affair, like trying to understand the Buddha or Ramana or anybody. Not that is not. This is a quest for truth. Truth is at the level of perception, not at the level of only intellectual analysis and agreement or disagreement. So he said, the entire purpose of what I am speaking is to make you realize the need to understand yourself. To understand yourself, you have to begin very simply with great humility, knowing that you don't know, and watching your consciousness, and whatever smallest disorder you find in the consciousness, investigate it. From where does it come? How does it originate? How does it grow? What does it do to your life? And how does it end? Just watch passively, and you will learn a lot about how your consciousness functions. Now, this is not a self-centered activity, because though you are watching your own consciousness and learning about the way consciousness functions, you are really learning about human consciousness, because the entire humanity shares the same consciousness. It's a little bit like you do the experiment in your laboratory and you determine a law. Now that law applies all through the universe. It doesn't apply only in your laboratory. So here, your own consciousness is the laboratory in which you are able to observe. You can't observe my consciousness. But whatever deep truths you find by observing your own consciousness make you understand my consciousness also, because my consciousness is not different from your consciousness at the deeper level. At the superficial level, of course, I know physics, you know art or something. The manifestations may be different. But at the deeper level, the truths are the same. Desire functions the same way in you, will have the same consequences in you as it will have in me. And attachment and all that. So in that sense, it's the same. But superficially, we all differ from each other. But we stand on the same ground. And the deeper truths are the same. And I find that again as a parallel to science, where we say the laws of nature are the same, whether it manifests in the tree or in the sun or in the quantum mechanics or in the black hole, the laws are the same. The whole universe is operating with those laws. So that's the job of science, to find that out. And so the truths are the same about our consciousness. But in order to learn that, I have to have a learning mind. And these are the qualifications of the learning mind, that it posits the truth as the unknown. It wants to discover the truth, not in order to make some profit or gain or receive name or fame, but just because that is its passion. You love to do that. You are interested in that. Then you are inquiring out of that, and you are looking for the learning of what is true and what is false. And the change is not your concern, but it will happen as a byproduct. It will happen as a byproduct. So that is the difference, that you don't go about it as something to be achieved, but is something that is unknown. And like we do in research, the only thing is in research there is a lot of previous knowledge. Here also you can use the knowledge which is given in philosophy books or in Krishnamurti's books, not to propagate the knowledge, but pick up the questions that he is raising. But don't pick up his answers. They are not your answers. You have to investigate those questions afresh in your own life. That is the teaching. So the teaching is to come upon the truth, and truth is not at the level of ideation. It's at the level of perception. That is the difficulty. Going from the description of the truth or the idea of the truth to the perception of that truth so that it becomes a reality for you. That bit is pathless. There is no path. But to get the knowledge of the truth, there is a path. You can read Krishnamurti's books or Buddha's books or Ramana's books and so on, and you will get lots of ideas. And if you accept those ideas as truths, that would be an illusion. So the
So,
philosophy professor lives with lots of illusions. He has a lot of words which he considers are the substitute for wisdom. You know, Mr. Achyut Patwardhan, I've stated this in my book, in my interview with him, and one of the most profound things he said, Krishna, I have been a good speaker. Because he was really a very good speaker and politician and all that. Even offered at some point the presidentship of India, but he declined. So um, anyway, he said, I have been a good speaker, but nobody knows how many tears I have shed wishing I didn't have this facility with words. Because words make us feel we have understood when we have not understood. It's a beautiful statement. Words make us feel we have understood when we have not understood. So these ideas are an illusion. And Krishnamurti said, idea, the original meaning of idea, if you go to the source of the word in linguistics, was to see. Later on, it became to think. The idea was something to think, but original meaning of idea was to see. I learned that from him. I mean, he pointed that out.
So, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
I like your suggestion of taking the book of Krishnamurti, throwing away the answer section, just use the exercises section.
Absolutely, absolutely.
think,
Otherwise, you are what? You are a second-hand human being. You haven't found anything for yourself. You may be mouthing Buddha's words or Krishnamurti's words, but what is your understanding in that? Right? So you have to speak from your own understanding. In fact, he forbade even what I am doing. He would be angry that you are quoting me. Don't quote me. He didn't want to be quoted. So I'm not following him. But he sometimes says things in such beautiful language and so succinctly that it's difficult to just put it in your own words. Of course, your explanations are your own, but I use the quotation because it's like quoting Khalil Gibran. I mean, he writes in such beautiful language. I can't express in that language. So just for that reason, one uses these aphorisms which Krishnamurti gave. But to take them as that you have understood that, the truth of that, for that you have to watch your consciousness. If really there is now no jealousy, no anger, no this thing, then you know that it has gone deep It is not just an intellectual opinion. Opinions are not truths. They may sound very nice opinion and so on. An opinion is just an opinion. It's an idea. Ideas are superficial things, easy to come by.
So, thank you, sir. Wish you
You're welcome.
all the best in your rest of your stay in USA.
Yes, thank you.
Ashwin, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hello, sir. It's
Yes,
been great listening to you all this while, and your message has been very thought-provoking. In the first talk, you mentioned at one point that we need to resolve the violence within ourselves by not repressing our feelings, right? So how would you put that in the context of a relationship? So if I express everything that I feel in my relationship with my friends or family, that inevitably brings up conflict between the people involved. So, and I also liked one of your, I mean, the way you put in one of Sam's questions that relationship is like a mirror where you see your own fallacies. Sorry if I'm not quoting it correctly, but how would you put that in perspective when one person has to resolve his inner violence?
first, with regard to relationship, if you pretend before your friend to be more virtuous than you are, you will live under fear that sooner or later he might discover what I really am. And therefore, that is the consequence of pretense. So one has to discover, why does one pretend? Why is one wanting other people to think of me as better than what I actually am? Why am I hiding the truth? Ultimately, it is because I want them to give me a better deal or to think highly of me undeservingly. I don't want them to know the truth. So from the religious point of view, that creates disorder, because you are creating an image about yourself which is not true. You are worried about your reputation, and your reputation is your image. And when somebody questions that reputation, or you will feel hurt. So all those consequences follow. It's still an ego process of wanting some benefits from the other. In a truly intimate relationship, like a husband and wife relationship or very close friendship, it's best to be completely transparent and open. If you are angry, to tell that I am angry, I'm upset, I'm sorry. I even know that I should not be, but the truth is that I am. Right? So complete honesty, then there is no fear about it. Your friend knows you inside out. And the fear that we have is that he might walk out on you. To give him the right to walk out. If he knows you as you are and decides to walk out, he has a right to walk out. Why should I pretend and in order to get a favor from him and so on? All that becomes this egoistic kind of relationship. And then you have to live up to that image which you create. Another consequence of this is becoming a split personality. I mean, you act one way in your office. You are ambitious, you are competitive, and you are aggressive, you are secretive in your work in order to get promotion. Then you come home, and at home you are not competitive, You are not aggressive. You are trying to be affectionate and loving, but you are possessive. You want more and more money and more benefits for your family. Then you go to the church, and there you are giving and donating. So which is the real you? The one in the church, the one at home, or the one in the office? Or on each place you are acting. You have adopted a facade which will make for success in that activity, in that place. So that's how the ego functions. And so you have to watch all this in yourself and free yourself of that, which means you have to free yourself of this desire that other people must think highly of me and that I must get special treatment from people and so on by creating an image and a reputation and so on. All that is behind that is a subtle form of egoistic activity which almost 99% of humanity indulges in, and it has its own consequences. If you can be flattered and praised, you can also be insulted. It's the same, two sides of the same coin. Somebody will criticize you and you will feel insulted. Somebody will praise you and you will feel flattered. There is in Shakespeare a very interesting conversation, I think in Julius Caesar, where I think Horatio says to Brutus that Caesar cannot be flattered. So, no, Brutus says to Horatio that Caesar cannot be flattered, and Horatio says, I'll go and tell Caesar that, flattering him thereby. Shakespeare was a great master of human psychology. Yeah.
Rohan, you want to go next?
Yes. Thank you, Professor Krishna, for your talk
You're
and
welcome.
sharing all the insights. My question, which you actually partially just answered in the form of saying that honesty is the best policy in relationship, but my question is regarding thinking together, as in dialogue, or as you mentioned, the self knowledge is um, a, a way towards transformation of own consciousness, right? And as for me, participating in a dialogue uh, is to do that for myself, together with friends. So how do we think together, and what value has it? What value has thinking together, and coming together in a dialogue for the process of understanding uh, ourselves and transformation of the self?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have been through this dialogue business for what, 30 years. Ever since I joined Rajkat, I have been conducting dialogues. Unfortunately, most of the time, it is not really a dialogue. It becomes a argument or a discussion because to have a real dialogue, the mind must be in a state of dialogue. Dialogue is not simply sitting around in a circle and expressing one's opinion and then listening politely to the other person and so on. In that kind of dialogue, which is not what Krishnamurti meant by dialogue, but which we are not able to do that Krishnamurti dialogue. So our dialogues have only the benefit that you may get from the dialogue a question which had not occurred to you, which your friend is grappling with. And so the question is a jewel, because this whole learning or inquiry is in investigating questions. Whether you get the question from Krishnamurti or from Ramana or from theosophy or from your own experience, it makes no difference. From where do you get the question? If you got the question, is pleasure the same thing as joy or happiness? So that's the question. It doesn't matter whether you got it from Krishnamurti or from Buddha or from Ramana, or your child came and asked this question. It just doesn't matter. What matters is, how do I relate with this question? How do I investigate it in my own life in order to deeply discover the truth about this and not just blurt out opinions of other people into it. So that's why this whole business, comparative religion and so on, is a very shallow affair. And unfortunately, the dialogue cannot have a depth greater than the minds that are participating in it. So when Krishnamurti says the world is the way it is because we are the way we are, our dialogue is also what it is because the way we are. If we have shallow minds, it's a shallow dialogue. So that was the advantage of having Krishnamurti in the dialogue, because then he brought a certain depth to it and so on. And that was a different experience. Though I must say that even in his presence, one didn't come to that discovery of the truth. So when we sit down and do this activity, it is very rare. My own experience is that occasionally between two intimate friends, when they are talking seriously about some issue, there can be a common perception of something which they had not seen before. But that's very rare, and that was what Krishnamurti meant by dialogue when he said two friends sheltering themselves from the rain and sitting under a tree, talking seriously about their problems and so on. Intimacy. When you have a group of 15, 20 people and you are trying to have a dialogue, everybody is at a very different level of understanding. There are some people who don't even understand the meaning of the words the same way as you do. So then somebody says, what do you mean religion is not this? Then you have to explain to him what we mean by religion here and so on. So it becomes the common denominator in that group. So when you have people who at least are beyond that, are using the same language with the same meaning, so at least those communication problems are not there. Even then, the problem of opinions and taking opinions to be truths which you have perceived, which is an illusion. So what Krishnaji is saying is that the purpose of dialogue is to perceive the same thing at the same level with the same intensity, the same truth. I have not found that happening. Yeah. So I don't think these dialogues, they don't succeed. But what value they have is that they give you sometimes a question which you have not, which may not have occurred to you. And those questions are still of value, not the ideas and opinions. Even in a book, the questions are valuable, not the answers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Including
Thank you for the
candid
answer.
Krishnamurti's book. Yeah.
Oh,
sir,
I wanted to ask
if
a
he doesn't give a candid answer, means he is pretending, hiding something, which I just told you that doesn't work.
Thank you.
One has to free oneself of that. Yeah.
Baldev, you were going to ask a question.
So, yeah. I have one question, sir, that when Krishnamurti talks about the transformation, he talks about that there's a mutation in the cells. So my question to you is, for example, if I have looked at jealousy, for example, and and observed it and noticed in myself, and now I'm free of jealousy. Is it not a transformation? I mean, I don't know
It
about
is
the cells have changed or
it is
not.
a partial transformation, and he did not regard partial transformation as a transformation. You have freed yourself of jealousy, let us say,
Yes,
because you have freed yourself of comparison. But
yes,
you have not freed yourself of habit. You have not reached a harmony between the intellect and the body and the mind. There is a lot more to understand and learn. You have understood one small thing, which is all right, it's good. You have broken one habit. And it is a mutation in the literal sense because ultimately that thought or that idea is held in the brain in the form of a neuronal circuit of neurons, which brings that repetitive thought to your mind. Now, if that circuit breaks, then that thought, you're freed from that thought. Another example I can give is, let's say, a man is addicted to cigarette smoking. Hmm? Now, there was a time when he was not addicted. At that time, if he looked at the cigarette, he didn't feel a strong desire for smoking. Later on, he gets addicted because he, with friends, he starts smoking and some chemistry sets in into his brain. Now the brain has changed because now he looks at the cigarette and he gets this intense desire. The brain produces that desire. So the brain cells have changed. Hmm? Now, normally what we do is we try to ask him to control this, which has its value at a certain level, but it won't break that circuit. The control, he tries to avoid friends who smoke. He can not go to a place where other people are smoking and so on, or not buy cigarettes and not keep them at home. Practical things like that, we give suggestions. They have their own value, but they are just a way of coping with this problem. They are not freedom from that problem. What Krishnamurti is saying is, if you if you deeply examine this whole business of habit formation and you see the tendency in the mind and what it does, and you free yourself of habit formation, that neuronal circuit in the brain can break and you can come back to the original state in which that circuit was not there in the brain. That's how I understand it. That's freedom. So freedom requires this mutation. The rest of it is just control, controlling yourself and avoiding situations which will accentuate the problem and so on. Those are practical suggestions. It's at the level of Dale Carnegie, how to influence friends and how to win friends and influence people and so on. That is how to manage the ego in society. That's
sir,
completely
if you
different
have,
from how to dissolve the ego.
but
Yeah.
sir, if you have completely, uh, I mean, broken this one negative emotion or this negative thing,
Yeah.
so really it now gives you a much more, I mean, insight into breaking other habits also. In a way, I
Certainly.
mean,
Certainly. But don't get satisfied with having done that. That is a problem. This, when you do it in order to seek satisfaction, you get satisfied with small achievements. And
mhm.
Krishnaji questioned that you don't accept the larger challenge because you are satisfied with small. I mean, if you read the dialogue in chapter 3 of my book, where I was trying to say that, Gandhi has done some good and Mother Teresa has done some good and so on. That's what he points out, that you are so satisfied with small little achievements and you say this good, that was good and this was good. So you never come upon the larger challenge. So don't approach it from that point of view. You haven't freed yourself, and therefore you need to keep on with this inquiry and not get satisfied with small achievements. In one of his early days, he gave another metaphor. He said, why worship at a candle when you can have the sun? So you know, that candles in the sun, that book was written around this talk of his. He talked about it. So he says, you're satisfied, or this man has done some good, and this man has done some good, and so on, and you're so easily satisfied, and you make them into heroes, and so on. So which prevents you from asking the deeper question. So not to reduce the challenge, to what is possible. The art of the possible is politics. That is not religious. The religious man asks the impossible question. Again, his words. Ask the impossible question. Don't say it is impossible, otherwise the energies won't come.
So we are getting on to the closing time. It's almost 8 o'clock for Professor in
5 o'clock. 5 to 8, 8 o'clock for me.
It's 8 o'clock for you there, yeah. And I mean, unless there are any other questions, can we get to the last portion of our program?
There's also a time to stop questioning.
So can I ask Jonathan to say a few words before we close? Yeah. Jonathan?
Yeah. Well, as I said, my wife is listening off camera, and she's been very emotionally moved by your talk, Professor. And I feel you've shared a wisdom with us that's not only wise in words, but in a way that leaves a deep impression that resonates in our hearts. And so we thank you kindly for taking the time to share with us the fruit of your wisdom and your self-inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. And thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So we'll close.
Hope to see you in person soon, sir.
Yes. Yeah. Let's hope that this COVID. We meet in Fremont. That'll be nice. Okay, Rohan.
Thanks, sir.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.